In the UK, there are 10,000 people with a race licence. Only 200 of them are women. My name's Nathalie McGloin and I am a racing driver. Last year, I became the first female with a spinal cord injury to be granted a race licence in the UK. I race cars against able-bodied men. Track driving is something that I would never have dreamt of doing had I not had my injury. Before my accident was a normal kind of teenage life. I had just completed my GCSEs, 2 weeks into A-levels, where I went to a friend's house in someone's car who had recently passed their test. And as we were driving back, it was going down a country road that had a bit of a blind crest. And there was a person's house the other side with kind of a blind turn in for the driveway. The person was turning into the driveway and we hit them and veered off and hit a tree. You know, life changes in an instant. And I went from someone who was making university choices and really looking forward to starting adulthood into someone who was very reliant on parents and medical staff. My physio introduced me to wheelchair rugby and took me to a training session. These guys were incredible. They were doing stuff that I didn't think was possible to do in a wheelchair. It was actually through wheelchair rugby that I was introduced to track driving by a teammate. I think I race because someone told me not to. That's how it all started. That's how I got into cars, and it's always progressed each stage of the way into something a bit better until it's kind of resulted in racing. But it started off when I wanted to buy a sports car. I went car shopping, and as I was leaving the dealership, I saw the 911. I went to my friend's house the next day. I mentioned the 911 and he stopped me in my tracks and said, "Don't be so ridiculous. The 911 is a driver's car. You won't be able to handle it." So I went in the following week and put an order in for one just to prove him wrong. And that's really where it all started. So obviously you drive a 911 and you're hooked instantly. When I first started out with racing and I talked about racing a Porsche, I was warned against it. The other team that I was with said, perhaps you should start off with something a little less powerful, something that you can really learn the driving skill in without all of the risk of the speed, etc. I wasn't having any of that. Straight into a championship with a Cayman S on slicks with very, very good drivers, but I don't do things by halves. So the car I race is a Porsche Cayman S. It's a PDK box, it's a dual clutch. The PDK system is really responsive and it allows me to race the car in automatic mode without being at too much of a disadvantage to the other drivers racing in manual. Now the Porsche Club Championship have been so accommodating for me because the model that I drive isn't really allowed in the championship because it's too late a model. So the earlier models are the ones that are really allowed in. But because I needed to race that for my adaptations and to make sure that potentially I could be competitive, they let me use it. So the PDK box is the gearbox. It's set up with radial hand controls. It used to be on push-pull, which are the standard hand controls that most people will drive with on the road, where you push forward to brake and pull back to accelerate. The radial controls are push forward to brake, push down to accelerate. It means that effectively I can left foot brake, I can mix. So when the car's in the corners, I can go from one to the other and mix them a little bit without unsettling the car. It's also set up with a custom seat which is moulded to my rib cage. I'm paralysed from the chest down. I have no sensation or movement below kind of here. So it's really hard for me to feel the car. You know what it's like, people talk about being able to feel the rear of the car through your bum in the seat. I have developed a system that's slightly different to that in that because this chair is moulded to my rib cage, I can feel it through my kind of upper body. I also process most of it through my eyes. I am an adrenaline junkie. Driving is not an aggressive sport, but it's a more disciplined adrenaline rush because the consequences if you get it wrong are so much higher. Although people might have been surprised to see a woman in a wheelchair competing, as soon as that initial reaction was gone, there was no eggshells trodden on, there was no softly softly. If I was racing with these guys, I was racing with these guys, and I had to put up with everything that they did. I think for me, a really big ambition is to compete at the top of my class within the Porsche Club Championship. The drivers in Class 1 are very, very talented. They've done a lot of racing, and if I could get anywhere near their times and their skill level, I will have really, really done something special. At the beginning of this year, I decided to set up a non-profit company called Spinal Track. Spinal Track is a company that teaches people who drive with hand controls how to track drive. It gives people the opportunity to be able to sample what I do in racing on the racetrack. Before Spinal Track, there wasn't really anything that enabled people who drove with hand controls to be able to do this. And I think the main message that I want to get across to people, because I do appreciate that I am fortunate in that I can afford to go racing, and not everyone is in that position, but I think the main point is that life after spinal injury doesn't have to be any worse, it just has to be different. And it can be the start of anything you want it to be.
Hello, did you enjoy that video? I sincerely hope you did. And do you fancy a little bit more Carfection in your life today? Because if you want to see our next video before it goes live here on YouTube, you can click right here to go to carfection.com, where it's waiting for you right now. As usual, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, and if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel, which you can do by clicking here.